Hello everybody, my name is Sascha Williams and today's video is going to be a continuation of last week's video, which was Kenpo Karate Stances, Stance Changes and Strikes Part 4. But we had only talked about the neutral bow stance and the forward bow stance, but we talked a lot about the rotation and body momentum. We talked about opposing forces and a lot of other things that we need to be aware of when we talk about stances and strikes, right? But there's other stances. There are other stances, right? So this is then the first part. Today's video is going to be part 1 of Kenpo Karate, more stances, stance changes, and strikes, okay? Now, one way you can think about this particular video and the one before is that it really explains the relationship between your stances and your stance changes and your strikes. Right, so it's not meant to be a video on explaining all the different strikes in Kenpo, but it's meant to be a video that explains how you use your stances in order to complement your strikes. Okay, it's probably been obvious, but I just want to make sure that there's a misunderstanding here. Right? So now, let's look at the next stance. Right? The next stance in the Kenpo system we're going to be talking about is the cat stance. That's an important stance, even though you don't use it quite as much. It has some very unique characteristics, so it belongs in certain situations. Right? Now, one thing that is unique about the cat stance is that 90% of your weight is on your back leg. So you have most of your weight, almost all of it, on your back leg. Right? That, by its very nature, makes it a transitory stance. You're not going to be standing on one leg or with 90% of your weight on one leg for very long. That's not a good idea. Right? We're going to talk in a moment about the advantages and the disadvantages of a cat stance, so that way you can get an idea of why this might or might not be a good idea to do. Right? But now let's take a look at what a cat stance actually can do for us, what it's useful for. Right? One of the first things is that the cat stance can align your front kick. Right, we're going to talk about this more in detail in a moment, but we're just going to let's mention a couple of things that are unique to the stance. Right, so it can line up your front kick. Right, it can also provide you additional range with your back arm, your rear arm. Okay, now in addition to that, it provides almost the identical rotation that we've talked about in the stance changes between the neutral bow and the forward bow stance. One shoulder moving forward, one shoulder moving back. Right, okay. Now it's different here because the depth is different. But that is nevertheless one thing that the cat stance does for us. It gives us the dual strike or the dual motion capability, right? Now, the next thing it does, it creates distance for us. So in certain for our upper body. For our upper body, it creates distance from our opponent. So it can be very useful in certain situations and can make a block much more likely to succeed. Excuse me. Right? So it's safer. A cat stance can solve environmental problems, particularly if your back is against the wall, right? Because obviously the issue of being braced and not getting pushed over when your back is against the wall is no longer an issue. Right? Now, it can also help you change direction. It's another type of a rear cover that the cat stance can be used for, right? And also, it can, in many different situations, it can just simply be a very, very rapid way to get cover for your lower body. All right? And again, we're going to explain that more in detail as we go on. Right? Another thing a cat stance can do for you is avoid a front leg sweep, right? By not having any weight on, or almost no weight on your front leg. Right? And in some situations, the cat stance can give you the opportunity to have 3 simultaneous strikes. That can be very useful. Now, there are disadvantages to the cat stance as well. All right? One of the first things is that, well, you are giving up your balance. Right? Somebody can push you over more easily because you have most of your weight on your back leg. Right? So you don't have that distribution of weight that you have in the neutral bow stance. Your weight is almost exclusively all on one foot, so that makes it easy to get pushed over. Right? Next, you can't even hold that stance for that long anyhow, because with 90% of your back leg, that's a very tiring thing to do for a long period of time. Then the next thing is you can't really kick with your back leg. You're giving that up. In the neutral bow stance, you could have still been kicking with either leg, and in the cat stance, you're only kicking with your front leg, albeit faster, but you can't kick with your back leg unless you get out of that stance. Right? So now one of the best ways to really understand the cat stance is by comparing it to the neutral bow stance and the forward bow stance. Especially with what we've covered on those stances already, we can see if there's any overlapping principles, and there are many, right? And so let's take a look at that. So one of the first things we notice when we look at this from the side view is that the cat stance obviously has a lot less depth, right? It doesn't take up as much space. The feet are not as far apart. Right? So you can do this in less room, right? But yet you still have a lot of similarities or several similarities with the neutral bow and the forward bow stance. In this case, more the forward bow stance. Your shoulders are squaring out, right? So your back shoulder is is turning forward while your front shoulder is turning back. So it shares that quality with the forward bow stance. But it's moving, your whole body is moving back, not forward, right? Your whole body is moving back. So that makes for different application. We're going to explain that as we go on. Now, of course, the reason why our upper body is moving back is because we are shifting our weight back, right? We went from a 50-50 weight distribution in the neutral bow stance to now a 90% to 10% relation in the cat stance, right? So once you do that, you don't want to keep your front foot out there. You want to pull your front foot back so that way your front leg can do things for you, right? You're not putting any weight on that leg to keep it all the way out. That makes no sense, right? If you bring it halfway back, more or less, you can now have it poised as a kick already, and you can put that 10% of weight on that front foot in order to be able to do some other things with the stance. Right? Now notice when you assume the stance, when you're coming back from neutral bow stance, that your front foot is going to be in line with your back heel. Okay? Now to find the proper depth of your stance, just take your front foot, place it all the way flat on the ground, and then look at the difference or the distance between your back heel and your front heel, right? And to tailor this stance to your body size, what you do is you make sure that that distance is equal to one of your feet, the length of your feet. Foot should fit right between those two heels. That's how you know that this stance fits you and makes sense with the size of your body, okay? Now as you shift your weight back, like I said before, about 90% of your weight is going to be on your back leg and at least 10% on the front leg. You raise your front heel up and you basically have just the ball of the front foot on the ground with your knee already bent, almost ready to kick. Your shoulders are squared out, like I said already, almost just like in a forward posture. Now, one of the first uses of the stance is being shown on yellow belt, on the technique number 1 and technique number 3, right? Where we basically use the cat stance in order to line up our front kick. Okay? And then you can see here in both of these techniques that this is actually going to be used to keep the opponent in check, right? So this strike is not just to induce pain, it is actually to ensure that our opponent cannot just simply attack with the second strike, right? So we can say that the cat stance here is actually helping our legs. It's stepping back so we can create the proper distance so that our kick can fit and we can keep our opponent in check. It helps our legs. Now next we're going to see this cat stance again on technique number 5 on yellow belt against the bear hug from the back, right? But here it's not to set up a front kick at all, right? Here the purpose of the cat stance is actually to rotate the upper body, because we want to gain access to targets to the rear, and if we rotate the upper body, then especially our right arm has very good access to targets to the rear and cannot be restricted by our opponent's arms anymore. Right? Now we're going to take advantage of the stance change still by doing the heel stomp. That's just taking advantage of dead space. You know, we move that foot back, we might as well stomp on our opponent's foot, right? And then that also gives us the advantage that you're now going to be borrowing force on the next move. We'll talk about that more later. And then next, we see this stance again on yellow belt in technique number 7, which is against the overhead club attack, a right overhead club attack, right? And here you notice we first get out of the way using a horse stance, or at least stepping out the right foot very rapidly, right? Which leaves you open, right? So yes, the cat stance is going to be used in this technique to line up your kick again, similarly like it was being used in technique number 1 and technique number 3, but there is an additional aspect here that we sometimes don't think about, and that is that when you step your right foot out, you are vulnerable. Your groin is exposed there for a moment, so pulling your left leg over into a cat stance takes care of that problem, right? Not only does that line up